And that was absolutely fascinating, that kind of cultural disconnect between us, and also the links. Very humorous stories about the German mindset in comparison to the Irish mindset. And we've worked together for a number of years. And I've always said the Germans and the Irish work very well together because we're so different. Germans is how direct you are, right? It's not the Irish way, as we've often talked about. The Irish, it's much more around the houses. I love the sort of direct German approach, and there were one or two people who were sort of saying, what are you doing here type thing, sort of, and I could tell.
Hier ist Perspektive Ausland. Schön, dass du wieder dabei bist. Wir haben ja jedes Mal sehr interessante Gäste hier und heute möchte ich dir einen sehr interessanten Gast vorstellen, den du vielleicht schon kennst. Es handelt sich um Sean O'Keefe. Er ist ja Host unseres YouTube-Kanals Things Visible und Invisible, also ein Kanal, der sich mit allen möglichen Geheimnissen, Mysterien, Verschwörungstheorien beschäftigt, von Bigfoot über Zeitreise und sehr interessante Geschichten, die man so nicht im Mainstream wirklich hört. Es ist ein Interviewkanal. Sean O'Keefe hat hier sehr interessante Autoren, die er interviewt. Wir sind hier gerade im Studio in London, wo Things Visible und Invisible aufgenommen wird. Aber für dich vielleicht viel relevanter ist, dass Sean O'Keefe auch immer wieder an unseren Events teilnimmt, an unseren Seminaren teilnimmt und auch das deswegen, weil ich es für eine unheimlich bereichernde Erfahrung halte, wenn eben auch Personen, die überhaupt nichts mit Steuern, Auswandern, rechtlichen Fragen zu tun haben, dabei sind, die dann mit dir sprechen. Sean hält auch jeweils dann Vorträge, meistens nach der Lunchpause, wo wir so ein richtiges Mental Reset machen. Er spricht zu etwas ganz anderem, was überhaupt nichts, wie gesagt, mit diesen sehr technischen Themen zu tun hat. Und diese Sessions waren immer sehr erfolgreich bei den Seminaren, die waren immer sehr gern gesehen und die haben die Leute elektrisiert, weil natürlich Sean ein hervorragender Geschichtenerzähler ist, ein hervorragender Storyteller. Über diese Erfahrung bei den Seminaren wollen wir heute mit Sean sprechen, was auch sein Eindruck ist natürlich. Und dann auch, was auch in Zukunft zu erwarten ist. Ich werde jetzt ins Englische wechseln. Die Untertitel werden dann auf Deutsch verfügbar sein. Aber wie gesagt, Sean spricht kein Deutsch. Deswegen werde ich das Interview in Englisch führen. Ich hoffe, du kannst verstehen, was wir sagen. Ansonsten eben lese am besten die Untertitel. So, I'm switching to English now. Many of you know Sean O'Keefe already from our sister channel, Things Visible and Invisible. If you don't know it yet, I highly recommend you watch it. I just described in German what the channel is about. Link in the description of this video. But that's not everything, because over the past year, Sean has also joined us at several of our live events. For example, various seminars and also our New Horizons Club summer activity. We were in London together, in Switzerland and Ireland, and Sean gave sessions that had nothing to do with tax, visas or logistics, but everything to do with perception, identity, culture, and how people actually think, how people actually feel. Interestingly, these were often the sessions people remembered most. Sean, people know you from Things Visible and Invisible, but over the last year, you've also become part of our live experience and our seminars in London, Ireland, and Switzerland. And the response from attendees has been extraordinary. You have now seen people engage with you both online and in person, commenting, for example, on the channel, but also then, of course, giving you feedback when you speak at our events and our seminars. What feels different?
Well, I think the two are very distinct. The channel, as you know better than I, Sebastian, feels very sort of distant. Like you, I turn up, I film, it gets cut, it gets edited, it gets sent out. Then you see some comments, and the comments, some of them are positive, some are just having a good time. That's okay. That's YouTube. The seminars, I think I would be right in saying that they came about almost by accident. I think you needed a little bit of something on the London tour, and we both were sitting around one day, and I think it came to an idea, well, why don't I take people and show them something of London? So that became a kind of, it was part of the party, the summer party, which was Farnborough, London, last summer. So we did that. And then I think at the end of that, you said, why did you come to Ireland? Do Ireland, because, I'm Irish, and go along. I said, okay, and we went along, we did that. And it was something very different again, because it was Irish history, Irish culture, helping people experience, and also talking. It was very interesting because I actually interviewed, as you know, some of the people who have made the transition from Germany to live in Ireland, and that was absolutely fascinating. Zurich was completely unknown. I'd only been to Zurich Airport. I'd never actually been to Zurich. I knew you'd run a number of seminars there, so this was something very familiar to you. But I think that experience was so different and so positive that it kind of opened my eyes. The other ones I could sort of say, well, I was in London, so I'll show you around. I've done that before for many people. The Irish one, yeah, I'm Irish. We can talk about Irish history till the cows come home. But Zurich was something a bit different. And I think, without wishing to preempt anything, I suddenly thought that this was something that I could play a part in. You know, there's something which it felt very natural. I tell you what, all the seminars, the major surprise, and it's a constant surprise on these seminars. The first seminar I went to...
So can I ask that as a question to you?
Sorry.
Because I have that actually as a question.
Let me,
that's actually the next question.
Okay, so let's pause there.
I mean, I can 100% agree to what you said. That's just how these things happen. Often it seems a bit like coincidence in life, you know, but then you realize it's actually not a coincidence, but we can talk a whole hour about that. But my question to you, Sean, here is, did anything about these live settings surprise you?
Absolutely. No, the whole thing surprised me. In fact, I think that the comparison with TVI it doesn't quite work, because it's almost like doing a studio album and then going on the road. And these seminars, for you in particular, Sebastian, but also for me, it feels like we're on the road, you know, we're touring. The thing that really shocked me on the first occasion, pleasantly, was because there were about 30 odd people, I think, on the London experience. And I went, and don't laugh, I went expecting people who were going to be very serious minded, talked in figures and stock market ups and downs, and talked about taxes. And were really kind of the sort of people that you and I knew of old in the city of London. Interesting people, a little bit dull, very focused on what they're doing with money and finance. Well, was I in for a surprise? It couldn't have been any different. Everybody I met at Farnborough was just, first of all, they were all interesting people, and I'm not just flattering the audience. They were doing different things. I mean, we had such a spectrum of people involved in different businesses, different financial ideas, but everybody came with a very open mind, and they all were sort of seeking, questing for a new way of living. They were not just talking about money, hoarding money, living in some financial bubble. They were wanting to really live life. And all the discussions, all the conversations were about mind, body, spirit. You know, how do I get the most out of life? Okay, I've done all this, I've made all this money, but then what happens next? And I was absolutely blown away by this. I think I said to you, Sebastian, where'd you get all these people from, you know? So then we went to Ireland, and it was something similar. And it was a little bit closer to home, because these were people who were seeking, but were seeking within Ireland. They'd come from a German-speaking country, and they were in Ireland. And that was absolutely fascinating, that kind of cultural disconnect between us, you know, and also the links. And there were some very humorous stories about what I've been learning about the German mindset in comparison to the Irish mindset. And I mean, we've worked together for a number of years. I've always said the Germans and the Irish work very well together because we're so different. So Ireland was really something. But then same sort of people, same sort of conversations, very endearing. I find your client group very endearing because they're very genuine people. They're questioning things. They've got open minds. They're not, as we would say, bourgeois, you know, in that sense. And then Zurich just was another league of that. I mean, it was again people living in Germany or Switzerland or Austria who were talking in this way. And the conversations are fascinating, very broad, never dull. I've yet to meet anybody on these seminars that you couldn't have a very interesting conversation with. To actually be part of that, to interact with those people, was first of all a pleasure, but it was also a sort of strangely a privilege to be amongst these people and to have this experience. And I was so thrilled. Because Zurich, I mean, I admire your confidence, Sebastian, at times, but I go into these things thinking, well, you know, if it doesn't work, so be it. But we went in, and I was absolutely amazed at the kind of reaction that people had. As I say, that really opened my eyes then to that there could be a possibility here that I could contribute to this club, which I've always said to you, the ethos of the club is something fantastic, right? Because it's not just about making money, keeping money, investing money. It's about investing in life. It's about changing your life. It's about a positive move to do something rather than the sterile lamentation about this country or that country or this tax regime or that tax regime. It's something really positive. And I think that energy, you know, I mean, I came back absolutely buzzing from Zurich. I was absolutely exhausted, but I absolutely loved it.
You're alluding to something very interesting here, Sean. I mean, obviously, these are very serious events. People pay, you know, a substantial amount of money to attend. It's about finance. It's about relocation. It's about planning. It's about very serious things in life. But yet you alluded to it already. Your sessions, they never felt out of place. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that's a really good question and something I've been asking myself since we returned from Zurich, because you're absolutely right. I mean, anybody who's coming on one of these seminars, you're going to get all the information and the advice that you would expect on a seminar like this. As you say, there are serious sessions about taxes and about passports or different regimes in different countries, all sorts of major questions that are in people's minds about their families or their finances are addressed. Okay, so you get all that. But it's the bits, I suppose it's what makes these seminars different from your average, rather dry, if I may say, seminar. And it was the bits around it. So you get the meat, but it's the bits around it. I think that's what I was sort of enhancing, you know, or bringing out. That this wasn't just about this. These things, yes, are important and, as you say, serious and detailed. But there's another side to this, and it's a bigger picture. So it's the micro and the macro. And I think that's what made a difference. The other thing is this. Although I was telling stories, and I was telling them in English, I have to say, and everybody, I'm amazed and delighted at the linguistic skills of your seminar groups. But they were not just sort of, you know, bedtime stories or fairy tales or something. You know, there were stories that were tweaked and directed to the things we were talking about. So some of the subject matter was very pertinent to Switzerland, for example, and to how people had used Switzerland as a place to go to escape tax problems, financial problems, personal problems. And I was looking at those kind of things. And what was a great pleasure to me was how these resonated with people. You know, they could literally, where we were in the seminar tower that we were having the seminar, you could look out the window to your left, and that was heading towards Lake Geneva. And we could talk about some events that happened there. And then if you look the other way, it was something else. That's how does that answer the question, Sebastian? Sorry.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, and it's actually interesting because intentionally we have given you the spot after lunch, right? So people had something to eat. But there's obviously more to that. I mean, normally the mornings, I would say, are the most intense part of the seminar. I know, Sean, you have worked in different fields and you've worked with people and you manage people in the past. You had different roles. Why do people, do you think, struggle mentally after hours of heavy information, and what made your contribution so valuable in that regard?
It was different. In a nutshell, it was different. You're absolutely right. I mean, I have been on many courses, day courses, and they call that slot the graveyard slot straight after lunch because most people are digesting their lunch. You know, they're maybe a bit distracted. They're in that sort of transition phase from work in the morning to work in the evening, and there's a little bit of a sort of downtime, and you know. And I think that was the genius, if I may say, putting me in that slot, because it wasn't what people were expecting. I think if you'd gone into another hour worth of tax regulations in Switzerland, you know, you'd have heard the snores coming out of the audience, you know, but not because of the content, but just because of the connection with after lunch. But I think doing something a bit different and something completely left field, people sort of sat up and thought, oh, what's this? And I think that's partly why it worked, because people were coming to me at the start of the day when they were first meeting me, and we had 3 different audiences through the week, and they'd say, "Oh, I saw your name on the schedule," but they couldn't kind of compute as to what I was doing there, and also I couldn't speak German, so what was I doing there? And I think actually, in hindsight, I don't know if you'd agree that the fact that they had to listen to somebody then in English as opposed to German, which was 80% of the presentations, that sort of took them out of their comfort zone. So I think doing something completely different in another language, in a totally different way, something they probably hadn't ever experienced at a similar sort of event, I think people were pleasantly surprised.
I totally agree. I mean, it gave me the opportunity to basically watch the audience while Sean was speaking, and I mean, I definitely had the feeling, that there was actually something happening in the room, something was changing, something kind of tangible. What do you think that was, Sean? What do you think actually happens in the room, when you were speaking after lunch?
Well, I think it's first of all, we all love stories, and storytelling is a very powerful medium in terms of communicating ideas. So I could have sat up there and talked, as some people do, about, change your life, all those sorts of seminars, change your life, change your socks, whatever it is, But actually to take a story and to take people with you on a journey, and they're not quite sure where you're going with the story, and then take them somewhere. As we both know, storytelling is the most powerful way in which to communicate an idea or leave a trace of something. So I think it's just those storytelling skills that people have, and we love. I mean, some of our earliest memories are being told stories by our parents, if we're lucky enough to have had that experience. I said in the group that I have this sort of strange idea that there are 3 essentials in life: food, shelter, and stories. How much time we invest in storytelling, be it watching Netflix, be it reading books, be it listening to narrative podcasts, or whatever, telling each other stories. So I think it was a combination of that sort of well-worn gift of stories and storytelling, but also then trying to make it relevant to the audience. This isn't just a story. There's a purpose to this, because the story is actually teaching as well as something. So we were telling stories about how people achieved their potential, or how people dealt with problems in their lives. Also then the vagaries of life, that sometimes you think such and such an event is a great thing, but it actually brings a lot of problems. And then you think something else is a disaster, but in fact it works out really well. So it's kind of just playing with those ideas. Your audience is a very sophisticated one. It's a very intelligent one, so they get it straight away. It was a pleasure to work with people who you could talk with at that level. My only slight reservation, if I have one, was that 95% of the people understood and communicated in English brilliantly and understood everything I said. I think there were 1 or 2 that kind of struggled a little bit. And what I would do again is to have the person beside them translate bits and pieces. So that was my only fear, that somehow I wouldn't communicate. But, there are certain things that are universal. And as you know, in storytelling, it's not just words. It's how you convey a story as well. Like you, and I wasn't expecting this, I felt mysteriously there was something happening in the room. Right. And the fact that you've got an Irishman in Switzerland on top of a tower talking to a German-speaking audience, and something was happening, was a thrill, but also something very mysterious, and something, if I may say, I would love to explore more.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so you have to know, when we do these seminars, you the audience, that we very intentionally build in a lot of breaks, right? Because the community conversations, asking questions, I would say even fellowship, is one of the most important aspects and benefits of these seminars.
Totally.
So during the break, coffee breaks, and then we do drinks after the seminar. I mean, mostly I'm there and answering questions that people have. So they come to me, and then it's another very intense time. And so I was kind of looking over to Sean, what he was doing. And I have to tell you, before the event, I was a little bit worried, will he be there standing on his own? But the opposite was the case, right? So he was talking constantly, and people were constantly approaching him and asking questions. I know, obviously, Sean is a very good communicator, but Sean, people came up to you constantly during the breaks. What were they saying to you? I mean, I was wondering, what were they saying to you?
Well, I mean, I was also going up to them, because I was curious as to who. I mean, I'm naturally curious about people. And I enjoy these type of events because of the caliber of the people that you attract to these events. So I'm kind of curious as to why people are there, and curious as to their life story to date. So that made a good starting point for a lot of conversations with people. People were curious about me then, and then some of them would want to talk about some of the things that, the story, I mean, there was one young man came up to me, and he was in a rather difficult personal situation, and he talked about how much one of the stories really sort of spoke to him about that at that point. And that was great, because I thought, well, this is why I'm here. I'm here to serve this audience. I'm here to try and help this audience. What were the conversations about? Everything. Germany, Austria, Switzerland, other countries, Panama. There wasn't anything we didn't talk about. We talked about politics, we talked about culture, we talked about the arts, people's motivation. You know, I mean, one of the key things that starts to come out of these seminars is motivation, in the sense of, you've alluded to it earlier, Sebastian, that how that motivation is often a solitary thing for a lot of people. And then they go to a seminar and they realize, wait a minute, there's other people that think like me. There's other people that are on a journey like me. And that sense of fraternity, fellowship, call it what you will, that very, very quickly melds the group into a cohesive unit. Very evident on the London tour, but I also witnessed it in Ireland and in Switzerland, that the group very quickly becomes a kind of cohesive group. You know, I mean, somebody said it when we were in Switzerland, we were on the streets of Zurich, and somebody said, we're Sebastian's family. And I know they were kind of joking, but there was an element of truth, that there's a kind of fraternity that is developed. And again, I would say that's what makes New Horizons different from anything else. You know, you can go to a seminar and you get the talks and you get the handout and you say goodbye and off you go. You don't get that at these events. You get something else, you know. So if you're going to come to one of these events, you got to be prepared for a fully immersive experience, which is as much about your heart as your head, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So allow me one slightly cheeky question. Did anyone tell you that they weren't sure what to expect from you, and that they thought, well, maybe I'm not going to like what he's talking about, but then they were like pleasantly surprised and said, oh, I loved what you were talking about?
It's always the case, Sebastian. There were a couple of people that, because one of the things I love about Germans in general, the German speakers, is how direct you are, right? It's not the Irish way, as we've often talked about. The Irish, it's much more around the houses. But I love the sort of direct German approach. And there were one or two people who were sort of saying, well, you know, you're on this, what are you doing here type thing, you know, sort of. And I could tell there was a certain lack of belief maybe in what I was supposed to be there for. And it turned out that they were the people who would come up to me at the end and say, that was amazing, you know, which is great. You know, I mean, all I wanted to know was I hadn't embarrassed you, I hadn't wasted my time or your time. So no, people were very forthcoming. It was more, to be honest, the more subtle moments where people were saying that really helped me, or I could really identify with that, you know, or you could tell, you know, even days after, people were coming and they were still thinking about a presentation and they were saying, you know, such and such, or they'd talk to a family member about it or something. So, I mean, this was beyond my wildest dreams. I mean, I really didn't know what to expect when we went to Zurich. I went along hoping I could make a contribution, and I was pleasantly surprised.
Any conversations in particular that stayed with you?
Yeah, many. Again, going back to the kind of people on the seminars, there's a seriousness of intent with which people are approaching these matters, because they're big matters. I mean, to leave one's homeland and move to another jurisdiction, or to make radical changes in one's life, these are huge issues for people. So there's a great seriousness, as there should be, and that's addressed by you and others on the seminar. The sorts of things we're talking about, it sort of gave it a kind of humanity, you know, that people were aware that, for example, that there were others on these journeys and that they could connect with them. There was an awful lot of people sharing details. I mean, that seemed to be straight away. And somebody commented on that with me present at the time at these events, how quickly they start sharing their WhatsApp or their telephones or whatever, you know, because they want to stay in touch, because they've found like-minded people. If I may say, there was something very humbling about being with people who are brave enough to take the challenges that you and others are helping them with. You know, as I say, these are huge challenges, and I hope that the audience doesn't mind me saying this. Most of the people in the room aren't in their 20s, shall we put it like that? So as you get older, it gets more difficult to really make radical changes in one's life. And yet people were approaching this with a great deal of not just courage, but also prudence. It was a humbling experience. I find these humbling experiences because I find that there are real people on these seminars. There's nobody there who's just pretending, or there to show, you know, I've got a new Porsche in the drive. There's none of that. There are people who are trying to change, are grappling with difficulties, often geopolitical difficulties sometimes. They are not the norm. Most people, it's go home, switch on the television and forget about the world. These are people who are head on facing major challenges in the world that are affecting them personally. That's something to be commended.
One of the most striking things was, and we haven't really discussed this, is the fact that you obviously do not speak German, so you were the only English speaker kind of in the room. Now, we pride ourselves with providing advice, consulting services in German in lots of different countries. It's one of our unique selling propositions. But yet here we have an English speaker. So it was very interesting. And I wasn't sure if this was working. The reason why I thought it would be a good idea was that, if you talk about moving abroad all the time and doing radical changes, as you just alluded to, you need to be able to handle also things like a different language. You need to be able to do a switch in your mind, right? Because if you move to a different country, even to Switzerland, which speaks German, there's a switch in your mind that has to go on. So in a way, you being there kind of symbolized that switch in mindset that is necessary. And that's what made me think this is actually a really good idea to have someone there in English to be kind of almost a symbol, I would say, of that kind of switch that is necessary. It makes people reactivate different areas of their brain, and kind of think suddenly different, because the interesting thing is when we think in a different language, the thinking actually becomes different, right? Because of the way languages are structured, and also because the areas of our brain we use to speak and understand foreign languages. But my question to you, Sean, is you spoke English where, maybe not all, but 95% of them were German, Swiss, or Austrian. Why do you think it still worked?
This is essentially an international focused seminar. It may be German speaking primarily, but it's international focused. And a lot of the countries that were being discussed as possible places that people could emigrate to or live in, or passports or whatever, the great bulk, English is the lingua franca, and there was an acceptance that being able to communicate in English was a great advantage. So I think there was something there in all that you've said about having somebody who speaks English at the seminar. So you're immediately having to engage in English, because I was talking to people and the only way I could speak to them was through English. So there was an immediate way where you had to click into gear, if you like, and speak English. And that takes you out of just thinking in a German or German-centric way, which again is what one of the points of the seminar, right? One of the points is to start thinking in an international way. But there's also something else I would suggest, and it's this: to speak in another language enables someone to create a fresh identity, in the sense that, whatever our native tongue is, that's often who we are. But when you speak in another language, you can be freer or more creative in how you engage. You can feel that you don't have any of the baggage of the past. And so much of what you're doing in the seminars is freeing people from not just the physical constraints of emigrating to a new place, but the mental constraints. So having somebody like me moving around in the group, it's actually saying, it's almost like a signpost to the future, and saying, well, if you're serious about this, and 90%, if not more, in the group, we're definitely serious about this. This is what you're going to have to engage with. This is what you're going to have to interact with. And maybe the session after lunch was a way of saying, well, actually, different language, different culture, different mindset, it can be pleasant. It doesn't have to be threatening. It can be something that you can engage with and come away and still have a positive experience about. So in a strange sort of a way, it's again a kind of microcosm of what you're doing on a macro level, which is about people moving to new cultures, having to engage with new languages. So like you, I was initially thinking, well, how's this going to work? Am I just going to be sat in the corner, everybody speaking German? But it was the opposite. A lot of Germans are very proficient in English. Let's not pretend otherwise. So they're very comfortable speaking English. And some of them, I think, rather like to be able to engage in English and then return to speaking in German. I think it worked from that point of view. In a strange sort of a way, I became this kind of catalyst for something which the seminar is trying to do.
Most of the time, obviously, during the presentations, you were watching people watching me or listening to me without really understanding, much of it or anything of it. Do you think people were listening differently when they were listening to you than when they were listening to me?
Well, it's a very, very interesting point you make, Sebastian, because I read somewhere, and don't ask me to cite the source, but 93% of communication is nonverbal. I was watching your seminars and watching the audience, and obviously I don't speak German. I could understand what you were talking about, more or less. But I could also understand some of the concerns and the questions that were coming up, probably because they're universal. So very specific points, very specific questions. I would say that the audience interaction is totally different because of the presentations being totally different. Your YouTube channel, Perspektive Ausland, and also your presentations, if I may say, are classic Germanic in the sense that they are about detail, about planning, about strategy, brilliant logistically, right? That's one of your great selling points, that if I'm going to move to a foreign country and a foreign land, this is a man who's going to help me to do that because he's looked at all the angles and they're sane, they're balanced, they're serious. So a lot of the questions that you were getting were people who were asking specific points. Am I right?
Totally.
And they were also specific points that related not just to your presentation, but also to what their planning was, which you know about because most of these people, if not all, are your clients. So you kind of know where they're coming through. So somebody would be very, very active, for example, in discussing a passport to Ireland because that's their specific thing that they're on to at the moment. Whereas somebody else, it was about Malta or Panama or the United States or whatever it happened to be. And it was a very specific question. With me, it wasn't questions because it was a moment when they could sit back, when they could switch off from that, but then they could engage in a different way. So it was very much that the questions or the comments or the thoughts about what I was trying to do came afterwards when we were drinking coffee or tea in the afternoon or out in the evening or whatever it happened to be. Because the other thing, if you haven't realized yet, New Horizon Club seminars are extremely sociable. You need to sleep for a week beforehand before you go because it's going to be really exciting and fun and you want to meet everybody, and then you need a week afterwards to recover. So the kind of comments, the kind of questions, the kind of conversation starters that came from what I was trying to do were much more social, as they should be. I mean, there was nobody raising their hand saying, wait a minute, I think it was 1967, not 1966. Now, if they had and I'd got it wrong, I'd be grateful. But it was more, they were being fed. Whereas with you, it was much more that engagement when you have an expert in the room and you want to find out about X, Y, or Z.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. It was very interesting for me to watch almost how people changed, Very interesting experience, I have to say. I want to come back a little bit to things visible and invisible. Do you see your sessions at those seminars and things visible and invisible as connected?
Yes, I do. First of all, it's part of Soho Podcasts. You're the CEO of Soho Podcasts. You're also executive producer on TVI. I'm not letting you get away with that. So it's a joint venture, and it's a joint media venture that we're involved in. We've been involved in other media ventures in the past, but this is what we're involved in now. It's an international media venture. And a bit like New Horizons Club, we set out on something unknown. Okay, now it wasn't completely foolhardy. We'd worked it out and we got a plan and we decided that this is what we're going to do. But in the same way that many of your clients are emigrating to distant lands where they have some idea, but not the whole story of how it's going to work. In a way, TVI is a little parable of that as well, that we set out on something which we don't know where it's going to go, how it's going to work, but we've got a rough idea and we've worked out, as you're very good at, we've worked out the logistics. I've brought what I brought to it and we just see how it goes. So there's that connection. There's a kind of way in which we're entrepreneurial in the media space. A lot of your clients are entrepreneurial in whatever they're doing. But also I think as well, what is TVI ultimately about? It's about stories. My job is to interview people often and they have stories to tell. 90% of the people on the podcast have written books and some of them are first-class storytellers of one sort or another, almost making me redundant in terms of I ask the first question and then they're off and running. But it's about stories, but it's also not just about stories because the premise behind the show, as you know, is also exploring things visible and invisible, and that can be a whole range of things. So sometimes we're exploring, if you like, behind what the official version of something is, or something that we all think we know. And then somebody lifts the bonnet and says, well, actually, there's something else going on here. So in a way, there's a similarity to what's happening at the seminars because we're talking about stories, but then we're also lifting the bonnet and saying, well, wait a minute, how does this relate to you, to your life? Is there some connection here with some of the changes that you're trying to make in your life in this story of a famous person or a situation? I take it all back to stories, and I think that there's an element that we're dealing with what's seen and what's unseen. And some of the seminars are dealing with what's the official version, and then what's the unofficial version that we have to deal with. And that's partly your remit as well, Sebastian, because you're showing them how the system actually works. And then we're also then asking them about how they work in that system.
In the evenings after the day had finished during the seminars, you were telling me, positively surprised often, that this and this person was already an avid follower of the channel, and they had given you detailed feedback on some of the episodes and suggested some new episodes. So my question is, if someone enjoys your live sessions during the seminars, do you think they will also feel that the channel is a little bit like a continuation of that?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because some people who hadn't met me before during the Zurich week, they really enjoyed the afternoon sessions that we had. So they went away and checked out the channel, but then they came back and said, well, it's very different from what you're doing. You know, they thought it would be more me sort of telling stories. So there is a differential, but the two sort of feed into each other, because other people who were familiar with the channel, they came thinking, well, this is going to be fun. Whatever it is in the afternoon, it's going to be fun because we like the channel and we like the sort of stuff that's on the channel. So it was interesting that people were seeing different sides to it. I mean, we laughed a bit about this when we were in Zurich, that one's like very fixed. It's like a studio album type thing, you know, where everything is done. But when you're with an audience, it's totally different because you're feeding off each other, you know, and it's much more live, much more active. And as you say, there's that mysterious element in the room, which maybe we don't want to interrogate too much, because whatever it was, let's just keep hoping that it keeps coming back, because it just sort of, you could feel by the end of the afternoon that people were really enjoying it and enjoying themselves.
I definitely got the same feedback from attendees. I think very much they enjoyed your sessions. And I think I got that feedback after every event that you attended with us. When we talk about Farnborough and London, what we really mean is we have this summer event every year for our club members. You know, when you attend our seminars, you become a member of the New Horizons Club automatically. You can also sign up for the membership. You don't have to attend a seminar. And we do the summer event, and Sean was there, and we did the last summer, we did a great Beatles walking tour through London, and people, you know, said they were amazed. I mean, they said, well, I mean, I could have listened to Sean forever, because we took a bus, actually a coach, into London from Farnborough, and Sean was giving us some background information on the Beatles, and people said, oh, this is amazing. I mean, I could listen to this all day long. We heard the same then in Ireland, and now again in Zurich. I want to come sort of to the last few questions. You alluded to it before. London felt different from Ireland. Switzerland then felt very different again. But what stayed the same, Sean, across all the events?
Well, first of all, you were there. So there's consistency of approach. The events are very well organized. I sometimes take it for granted how well organized and how well drilled everything operates. So everything worked like clockwork. And that's on the 3 seminars that I've been on. So that was the first thing. The second thing, which I've already talked about, was the caliber of the people on them. The way in which these are sophisticated, intelligent, and questing group of people. So they're very unusual in a sense. This is not your ordinary business seminar group, you know. It's not even your sort of ordinary tourist trip around London, you know.
So it's not just an information dump, right?
No. And I think that's the key, you know, because let's be honest. The type of people you're dealing with could spend a day on the internet and find an awful lot of information, right? That's not why they're going to these seminars. They're going to the seminars, I would say, maybe subconsciously, for an experience. Now, it's an experience which is either confirming their thinking, confirming their choices, but also confirming who they are in a sense. And that comes through the other participants. This is also the sort of mysterious element that's in the room, that the other participants are somehow helping each other in a way, often subconsciously, in these little discussions that you have in the breakout sessions or whatever it happens to be. So you've got yourself, brilliant organization, you've got these wonderful people who turn up. The other thing is, Sebastian, I don't know if this is, you've got greater experience in this realm than me, but I never heard anybody complain.
Well, that's...
Maybe they complained to you in German, but to me, nobody complained about anything, you know? I mean, they never, everybody was just accepting and going along with things. So there's a good spirit amongst people. So I think they're the common things. There's a good spirit. There's a willingness to try new things. There's a good group of people. Just sort of works. So on top of all of that, you've got all the usual stuff you would expect on one of these seminars, okay? So you're going to get all the information you want, the information dump, you're going to get all of that. You're going to get all of the networking, you're going to get all of that. But you're going to come away after, be it 2 days, 3 days, or 5 days in some cases, and hopefully you're going to come away thinking, wow, that was something that, touched my heart, not just my head.
Sean, last question. Of course, I have to ask, will you join us again, wherever the next seminar may be?
Absolutely not. No, of course, I would be delighted to. The trouble with these seminars, as you know better than I, by the end of it, your brains are scrambled, right? And it takes a week to get back to normal in a sense. Especially, I think a lot of people don't realize how much work you put in. I do, because I'm with you most of the time. And also I realize that your working day starts at about 4 a.m. probably, especially
maybe 5.
well, when you're doing your videos and all the rest. And then it finishes, sometimes we were getting in a cab at like roughly about 12:30 at night. So it's a long day and an awful lot of work goes into that. But yes, I'd be delighted if I can help and serve New Horizons Club. I love the idea of New Horizons because it's that idea of something really positive, but something a little bit out of reach at the moment. And the club's idea is let's help each other achieve those potentials,
Well, that was a great word to finish this interview. Thank you very much, Sean. Also, wenn euch dieses Interview gefallen hat, der Sean wird bei weiteren Seminaren dabei sein. Wenn er dabei ist, werden wir es natürlich jeweils dann ankündigen auf den eigentlichen Webseiten zu dem entsprechenden Seminar. Schau dir auf jeden Fall unser Seminarprogramm an. Wenn du dich mit dem Thema Plan B beschäftigst, wenn du dich mit dem Thema Auswandern beschäftigst, dann werden wir dir dort auf jeden Fall etwas zu bieten haben. Schau es dir gerne an. Der Channel vom Sean ist Things Visible and Invisible. Wir verlinken dazu natürlich in der Beschreibung zu diesem Video. Es würde uns natürlich freuen, wenn dir auch dieser Content gefällt. Er kommt, wie gesagt, ebenfalls aus unserem Hause. In diesem Sinne, vielen Dank an Sean, vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und Zuhören. Bis zur nächsten Folge.
Bist du Unternehmer, Freiberufler oder Investor? Zieht es dich schon lange ins Ausland? Mach heute den ersten konkreten Schritt in eine Zukunft mit mehr Geld und mehr Freiheit. Buche ein Beratungsgespräch mit Sebastian und seinen Kollegen. Unsere Kanzlei unterstützt Mandanten wie dich dabei, deine Steuerlast legal zu reduzieren, Vermögen aufzubauen und zu schützen und deine persönliche Freiheit zu maximieren. Profitiere jetzt von unserem Fachwissen und unserem Netzwerk. Gehe zu mandatierung.com und werde Mandant unserer Kanzlei.